Welcome to Starbound. My name's Chikondi, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Farron and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now let's get into today's story. Accidentally starting a seminar on killing humans? Among the many deep ambitions in Zirax's nerdy mind, this was definitely not one of them. It was a topic he wouldn't even consider appropriate for an interspecies school under normal circumstances. But that was about to change when the door to his dorm room suddenly opened, revealing a strange creature with a patch of pale yellow fur above its head and a body that looked dangerously stiff for a biped.
"What are you, and what are you doing in my room?"
Ziraxis blurted out, his textbook slipping from his grasp.
"Oh, didn't the school administration inform you? You're getting a roommate," the creature replied casually. "I'm Vince, human, male, 16. Nice to meet you."
Zirax stared at him for a long moment.
"Human?" "Yeah, from Earth. Third planet in the Sol system?"
Vince shrugged when Ziraxis continued to look blank. Ziraxis didn't reply. He just stood there, staring blankly at the human for what felt like eternally awkward seconds. Then his brain finally processed those words. Human, Earth, Sol system. And he remembered that humans were classified as Category 15 Deathworlders. Every single one of his internal organs began to shake visibly, the tremors rippling through his transparent, gelatinous bipedal body like waves through disturbed water. The school had assigned him a Deathworlder as a roommate. He utterly hated them. They always bullied him in the shared spaces of the school, always mocked his academic focus, as if they were jealous of his certainty about being accepted into the best interspecies university just 2 standard years from now, and frustrated that here, in a civilized society, their physical prowess meant very little compared to the power of a sharp mind. He raised his head to take another look at the human, and what he saw made his organs shake even harder. The creature exuded an aura of power that felt even stronger than his usual bullies, something primal and dangerous that made every survival instinct in his body scream warnings. He could not allow this insane pairing of roommates to happen, or else his life would turn into hell. His transparent body, evolved to absorb stellar light directly for sustenance, was even weaker than that of non-Deathworlder herbivores. To someone at the absolute bottom of the physical strength charts like him, the prospect of sharing a room with a Category 15 Deathworlder felt like a death sentence.
"No, absolutely not!"
Ziraxis threw a complete fit, his voice rising to an almost hysterical pitch.
"This is unacceptable! I refuse to—"
His hand was already reaching for his data crystal, frantically contacting the school administration before the human could even express his opinion about the arrangement.
"Wait, just listen for a second."
Vince took a step forward, hands raised in what he probably thought was a peaceful gesture.
"Stay back!"
Ziraxis scrambled backward, nearly tripping over his desk chair as his trembling fingers worked frantically on the data crystal.
"Principal Shihaza, this is Ziraxis. There's been a terrible mistake with my room assignment."
"Look, I know how weird I look to you, but I'm not going to hurt you," Vince said, moving slowly around the scattered textbooks on the floor. "Can we just talk about this?"
"A Category 15 Deathworlder in my room!"
Ziraxis continued into his crystal, ignoring Vince completely.
"I need an immediate reassignment, or I'm withdrawing from the program!"
He was likely the only student with the principal's direct contact stored. He'd earned the school quite some reputation in the last inter-school challenge, and was probably the only student whose case of injury had ever caused the principal to be involved personally.
"Seriously, just give me 5 minutes."
Vince reached toward him.
"Don't come near me!"
Ziraxis shrieked, nearly dropping the crystal as he pressed himself against the wall. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, growing rapidly closer. A figure appeared in the doorway, and Zaraxus's eyes widened in surprise at how quickly the director had managed to arrive. The figure in the doorway was Principal Sihaza, a Vriar with pale green skin and a face that bore no eyes at all. Instead, her eyes rested atop a pair of long antennae that moved independently, one turning toward Vince while the other focused on Zaraxus's trembling form against the wall.
"What is going on here?"
she asked, her voice surprisingly gentle despite the authority it carried. Zaraxus spoke faster than Vince could even open his mouth.
"Principal Sihaza! They've assigned me a Category 15 Deathworlder as a roommate! This has to be some kind of administrative error! I can't possibly—"
"Actually," Vince interrupted, "I was just trying to introduce myself and explain that we're roommates now, but he kind of freaked out before I could—"
"This was my plan,"
Principal Sihaza said quietly, both antennae now focusing on different points in the room.
"to fix many things that are wrong with this school, like those Deathworlders who have been bullying you, Zaraxus. Not even the teachers and students know that a human has been accepted here yet."
One antenna turned toward Vince.
"I have high expectations for you, despite, or perhaps because of, the challenging environment you come from. Your admission might be exactly what this school needs."
The other antenna swiveled back to Zaraxus.
"Though I didn't expect you would have such a strong reaction to our new student."
Zaraxus's organs continued their visible trembling.
"It's not! I don't think all Deathworlders are! I mean, it's just that my experiences have been—"
He trailed off, unable to voice his real beliefs without sounding completely prejudiced. Principal Sihaza sighed, and Zaraxus got the uncomfortable impression that she could see right through his careful words.
"I'll offer you this. Agree to share the room for a single night, and tomorrow I'll arrange a different assignment."
Zaraxus considered the offer carefully. He knew the principal would not go back on her word, and he feared that if he refused even this compromise, she might take back the offer entirely.
"One night,"
he agreed reluctantly. The principal nodded and left after regarding them both with an unreadable expression, her footsteps fading down the hallway. An awkward silence settled over the room like a heavy blanket now that they were alone again. Zaraxus didn't even try to address Vince. Instead, he began collecting his books and small belongings scattered across the floor. He had decided he would spend the night in the school's library rather than share a room with a Deathworlder.
"Where are you going?"
Vince asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence.
"The library,"
Zaraxus answered truthfully, not looking up from his gathering. To Zaraxus's utter surprise, Vince said,
"I don't want to cause you trouble. If you've had such bad experiences with Deathworlders, I understand you wouldn't want to be my roommate. That's fine. We're cool."
Vince headed toward the door, and as he crossed the threshold, Zaraxus found himself asking,
"Where are you going?"
"If someone needs to sleep in the library tonight," Vince replied, "it should be me."
And then he was gone, leaving Zaraxus alone with his books and a strange, unexpected feeling he couldn't quite identify, completely lost as to what to expect when they meet again during class tomorrow. A day had passed since the roommate incident, and Zaraxus sat in his usual spot in the front row, surrounded by the cluster of non-Deathworlder herbivores who formed his typical study group. He clutched his data pad tighter than necessary, his transparent organs still carrying faint tremors from the previous night's encounter. He had already noticed that Vince had entered the classroom, wearing a hooded garment that somehow prevented the other students from recognizing there was a human among them. Zaraxus blamed the ease with which he blended in on the fact that no one would question a student dressed in such a way. It was typical for skin-shedding species to hide themselves during their molting cycles, so a hooded figure barely registered as unusual. One thing that Zaraxus didn't fail to notice, however, was where the human had chosen to sit. Vince had taken a seat in the Deathworlder corner, the section where carnivorous beings from high-gravity worlds naturally gravitated, and was sitting right beside Mizara, a black-furred feline who liked to hang out with the very group that made Xeraxis's life miserable in the public spaces of the school. The sight sent Xeraxis's normally logical mind into complete turmoil, nearly erasing the sliver of good impression he'd formed of the human the night before. Of course Vince would gravitate toward the bullies. Of course he would fit right in with them. The other students who had been lazing outside the classroom suddenly began filing in quickly, which could only mean one thing. Mr. Hiax was about to enter and start his xenobiology class. Mr. Hiax glided through the doorway with the typical grace, his tall, slender frame seeming to flow rather than walk. His pale blue skin was soft, and his angular features were both sharp and delicate, with high cheekbones and pointed ears that moved as he surveyed the room. His silver hair was pulled back in an intricate braid that fell past his shoulders, and his large, almond-shaped eyes held an aura of wisdom that made even the rowdiest students fall silent.
"Settle down, class,"
Mr. Hiax said softly, his voice carrying easily through the room without any need for volume. He didn't even glance toward the hooded figure in the Deathworlder section as he arranged his materials on the front table. Xeraxis watched the human sitting among the carnivorous students, his transparent organs churning with a mixture of anxiety and something darker, resentment. Right there and then, he decided he would at least once make life a bit harder for the human. After all, in his thoughts, it was inevitable that Vince would join the Deathworlders and quickly become just like them. Why not speed up the process and expose his true nature now?
"Today we'll be discussing the various adaptations that allow creatures from Deathworlds to survive in such hostile environments,"
Mr. Hiax began, his graceful hands gesturing as he spoke.
"The remarkable qualities of—"
Mr. Hiax!
Xeraxis interrupted, raising his hand with the confidence that came from being the class's most distinguished student.
I have a theoretical question that might help us understand these abilities better.
The teacher paused, one eyebrow raised elegantly.
"Of course, Xeraxis. Please proceed."
In a hypothetical scenario,
Xeraxis began,
if one were to kill a human, purely for academic understanding, of course, what would be the most effective approach given their Category 15 Deathworlder physiology?
The question lingered in the air like a poison cloud. Xeraxis kept his gaze directed at the Deathworlder corner, hoping to catch Vince's reaction in his peripheral vision. Mr. Hiax took the question seriously, completely unaware of the hooded human sitting just meters away.
"An excellent theoretical question, Xeraxis. Since there's no human present, we can discuss this candidly."
He began pacing, his movements still graceful despite the dark topic.
"Humans are creatures of strength, but they do have vulnerabilities. Their dependence on oxygen is more critical than most Deathworlders. Cut off their air supply and they become incapacitated within minutes. They are also surprisingly fragile despite their reputation. Their bones break more easily than you'd expect from a Category 15 species. A targeted strike to their respiratory system or certain pressure points could prove quite effective in a theoretical combat scenario against the Galactic Council."
When Xeraxis found no visible reaction from Vince, his resentment flared hotter. If subtle provocation wouldn't work, perhaps something more direct would expose the human's true nature.
Mr. Hiax,
Xeraxis said, his voice taking on the tone he used when proposing academic initiatives.
Perhaps we could conduct a practical seminar on the topic. Have each student contribute their species' theoretical approach to containing a rogue human. It would be an excellent exercise in comparative xenobiology.
The teacher's pointed ears tensed with obvious discomfort.
"I'm not sure that's entirely appropriate for—"
That's a brilliant idea,
interrupted Kalira, one of the herbivorous students sitting near Xeraxis.
Understanding Death Worlder vulnerabilities could help us in the future. Absolutely,
agreed another herbivore.
Zeraxis always has the most insightful suggestions for expanding our learning.
Mr. Hiex looked around at the nodding heads of several students, clearly feeling pressured by Zerax's academic reputation and the support building around him.
Very well, he said reluctantly, but we'll frame this as a theoretical exercise in species containment protocols. Each student can share their thoughts on how their species might, manage a rogue human scenario.
Hands shot up around the classroom with disturbing enthusiasm. Mr. Hiax called on students one by one, each contribution making the atmosphere more toxic. Mizara, the black-furred feline deathworlder beside Vince, stretched languidly before speaking.
It's funny that this interesting topic was actually the nerd's idea,
she said with a smirk toward Zeraxis, who bristled at the casual insult.
But my species could use our claws to cut the human's neck. I heard somewhere that their necks are surprisingly soft.
My species would just smash the human,
declared Kazur, one of the fully furred Ziriar, who particularly enjoyed tormenting Zeraxis. When other students laughed and pointed out that humans came from a high-gravity world, he quickly corrected himself.
Fine! If they're resistant, we just keep beating them until they stop moving.
The suggestions kept coming, each more disturbing than the last. A spindly student from the middle row suggested using poisonous projectiles. Another claimed his species had superior weaponry compared to human technology. A scaled Varir near the back even suggested that a bite from his species would likely cause massive damage to human physiology.
The key would be overwhelming their sensory systems,
offered another student.
Humans rely heavily on visual input. Psychological warfare,
suggested someone else.
Break their mental state first.
Mr. Hiex's expression grew increasingly troubled as he noticed the class was enjoying the topic far too much. The academic exercise had devolved into something that felt uncomfortably like planning an actual attack.
Perhaps we should move on to our scheduled material about...
But Zeraxis barely heard the teacher's attempt to redirect. His attention was laser-focused on the hooded figure in the Deathworlder corner, searching desperately for any sign of reaction. The human had remained remarkably silent through the entire discussion, not even shifting in his seat as student after student described methods for killing his species. How could anyone have such self-control?
I think that's quite enough of this theoretical exercise,
Mr. Hiex said firmly, his graceful demeanor cracking slightly.
Let's return to our actual curriculum.
The moment silence fell over the classroom, the hooded figure slowly rose from his seat. Every eye in the room turned toward him as he reached up and pulled back his hood, revealing distinctly human features. Pale skin, forward-facing eyes, and that patch of yellow hair Zeraxis recognized from the night before. Vince looked around at all the students who had so enthusiastically contributed their suggestions, his gaze lingering on each face. Finally, his eyes settled on Zeraxis, staring at him for what felt like an eternity before turning to address Mr. Hiex. Actually, Vince said simply, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, that won't work. None of your suggestions would kill someone from my species. The classroom erupted into chaos. Students gasped, chairs scraped against the floor, and several herbivores actually scrambled backward from their seats. Even some of the Deathworlders looked genuinely startled. Apparently, none of them had expected their theoretical target to suddenly reveal himself. Mr. Hiex's normally composed features went completely pale, his silver hair seeming to shimmer as his pointed ears moved from side to side rapidly.
Actually...
he stammered, his voice cracking for the first time anyone could remember. Zeraxis felt his organs convulse violently within his transparent body. What shocked him most wasn't that the human had revealed himself. It was how utterly unbothered Vince appeared to be. There was no anger, no hurt, no fear, just confidence, as if he'd been listening to a discussion about the weather rather than the detailed plans for his species' extermination. "I'm human, yes," Vince said simply, his hands clasped behind his back. "Vince from Earth, third planet in the Sol system, as I mentioned yesterday to a certain roommate."
But how?
Mr. Hiax struggled to regain his composure.
No human has ever been admitted to this institution. The safety process alone would be impossible for Category 15 Deathworlder to navigate.
"Principal Shihaza made special arrangements," Vince replied. "She believed it was time for some changes around here."
This is highly irregular. I wasn't informed of any new students, let alone a human enrollment.
The teacher's voice carried a note of panic.
The safety concerns alone.
"I'm not here to hurt anyone, Mr. Hiax. I'm here to learn, same as everyone else."
But the curriculum, the seating arrangements, the dietary requirements, none of this was planned for human integration.
"I can sit anywhere you're comfortable with, and I brought my own food supplies. As for the curriculum, I think I'm already learning quite a lot about interspecies relations." Mr. Hiax's eyes darted around the classroom, landing briefly on each student who had contributed to the theoretical murder discussion, and then staying fixed on Zeraxis for a few seconds.
I need to verify this with the principal immediately.
The teacher pressed a small device behind his pointed ear, activating his implant communicator. Zeraxis could only hear Mr. Hiax's side of the conversation, but it was enough to piece together what was happening.
Principal Shihaza? Yes, this is Mr. Hiax. I have a rather urgent situation in my classroom.
Pause.
There's a student here claiming to be human and...
Another pause. Longer this time.
Yes, he does appear to match the physiological characteristics, but...
Mr. Hiax's expression shifted from panic to confusion to something approaching dread.
You intentionally didn't inform me?
Pause.
A social experiment?
Longer pause.
Yes, I understand the importance of authentic reactions, but Principal, my students just spent the last 15 minutes discussing theoretical methods of...
Pause.
No, he seems completely unaffected by it.
Pause.
Very well. Yes, I'll make the announcement.
Mr. Hiax lowered his hand, his face now bearing the expression of someone who'd just learned his orderly world had been turned upside down.
Class,
he announced, his voice slightly hoarse.
It appears we do indeed have a human student joining us. This is Vince, and he has been officially enrolled by Principal Shihaza herself.
Vince stepped forward slightly, offering a small wave. "Hey everyone, nice to meet you all officially." His gaze found Zeraxis again, lingering for a moment before he continued. "I know this is probably weird for everyone, but I'm looking forward to learning alongside all of you." Then he turned to address the students who had contributed to the earlier discussion, his tone remaining conversational and friendly. "Mizara, right?" he said, looking at the black-furred feline. "You mentioned using claws on human necks. Actually, human necks are pretty well protected by muscle and bone structure. Plus, we've got pretty good reflexes when it comes to protecting vital areas. Your claws would probably get caught in the muscle before reaching anything important." Mizara's ears flattened against her head, but she said nothing. "And Kazura," Vince continued, turning to the Ziriar who had suggested repeated beatings. "Humans actually get stronger under stress. It's called an adrenaline response. The more you hit us, the more our pain tolerance increases, and the more desperate we become. You'd probably just make us more dangerous, not less." Kizara's 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession. "The poisonous projectiles idea was creative," Vince said to the spindly student. "But humans have pretty advanced medical knowledge about toxins. We've been dealing with venomous creatures on our world for millennia. Most of us carry broad-spectrum anti-venom protocols when we visit other planets. Not that we need to use them often, since we're naturally pretty resistant to toxins." He addressed the student who had mentioned superior weaponry. "As for technology, humans might surprise you there.
We've gotten pretty good at making things that go boom, considering we've been at war with each other for most of our recorded history.
To the scaled Varir who had suggested biting,
Human skin is actually much tougher than it looks, and we heal pretty quickly. Plus, we could bite you back. Our teeth might look small, but we've got pretty powerful jaw muscle structure. The sensory overload idea is nice, he told another student, but humans adapt to sensory changes really fast. We originally evolved as persistent hunters. We're built to keep going even when conditions get difficult.
Finally, he addressed the student who had suggested psychological warfare.
That one might actually work, depending on the human. We're definitely vulnerable to mental stress, though it might also just make us angry as a species. And angry humanity? Well, not a single alien had seen that yet.
Throughout each response, Vince's tone remained educational rather than confrontational, as if he were simply correcting misconceptions in a study group rather than addressing plans for his own species' destruction. When he finished, he returned to his seat in the Deathworlder section, settling back down next to Mizara as if nothing unusual had happened. Mr. Hiax stood at the front of the classroom, gripping the edge of his table for support. His normally graceful demeanor had completely abandoned him, and he looked like he was about to faint from how drastically this class had deviated from what should have been a routine lecture on Deathworld adaptations. The silence that followed was deafening. To both Zeraxis and Mr. Hiax's horror, the entire class suddenly broke the silence at once, everyone speaking over each other as Vince became the center of attention.
Right! So, humans really fight each other constantly?
Asked a herbivorous student with wide, fascinated eyes.
Is it true that your planet has multiple different climates on the same world?
Chimed in another.
How do you deal with the gravity difference here? Doesn't everything feel too light?
Mizara, who had seemed embarrassed moments before, now leaned forward with genuine curiosity.
You said humans bite back. Do you actually use your teeth as weapons?
What's this persistent hunting thing? That sounds terrifying,
added a scaled student from the middle row. Vince found himself surrounded by eager faces, all pressing closer to hear his responses.
Well, yeah, humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. It's not great, but it did make us pretty good at surviving conflict,
he said with a slight grin.
And yes, Earth has everything from frozen wastelands to scorching deserts, sometimes just a few 100 kilometers apart.
That's incredible,
gasped one of the herbivores.
How does any species adapt to such variety?
We don't, really. We just make tools and clothing to handle whatever environment we're in.
The questions kept coming, and Zeraxis watched in growing dismay as student after student seemed genuinely impressed and interested in the human. Even some of the Deathworlders who usually tormented him were asking thoughtful and friendly questions about humanity and their culture.
So when you said we'd make you more dangerous,
Kazura asked, his multiple eyes blinking thoughtfully,
what exactly happens during this adrenaline response?
Your heart rate increases, pain sensitivity decreases, reaction time gets faster, and you get access to strength reserves you normally can't tap into, Vince explained. It's basically an emergency survival mode.
That's actually pretty impressive,
Kazura admitted, and several other students nodded in agreement. Zeraxis felt his organs churning with a mixture of dread and something uncomfortably close to jealousy. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The human was supposed to get angry, reveal his savage nature, maybe even attack someone and prove Zeraxis right about Deathworlders. Instead, Vince was charming the entire class with his calm explanations and self-deprecating humor. He glanced at Mr. Hiax, who remained frozen at the front of the classroom, gripping his table with his long ears lowered. The teacher's expression was unreadable. Zeraxis couldn't tell if he was relieved that things had settled without a Category 15 Deathworlder going berserk in his classroom, or if he was simply overwhelmed by how completely his lecture had imploded for the day.
Is it true that humans can eat almost anything?
Asked another student.
Within reason, Vince laughed. We're omnivores, so we can handle both plant and animal matter, though we're not quite as adaptable as some people think. There are plenty of things that will definitely kill us. The casual way he mentioned his species' mortality made several students chuckle, as if they found his honesty refreshing rather than concerning. Zaraxus's mind began spiraling into darker territory. What would happen when class ended? Would the human pursue revenge for today's humiliation? The logical part of his brain tried to argue that Vince had shown no signs of aggression, but his prejudices ran too deep. Every Deathworlder he'd encountered had eventually turned on him. Why would this one be different? His transparent organs twisted with anxiety as he imagined Vince cornering him in the hallways, maybe bringing along his new Deathworlder friends. Kazur alone was bad enough, but now the human might have the entire carnivorous section of the class as allies. His academic reputation wouldn't protect him from a pack of angry Deathworlders who felt he'd insulted their new cool friend.
Do humans really heal faster than most species?
Someone was asking. Compared to most, yeah. We've got pretty good active immune systems and good blood clotting responses. Comes from living on a world where everything's trying to kill you, Vince replied. More laughter rippled through the group surrounding him. Even students who had never spoken to each other before were bonding over their fascination with the human. Zaraxus realized with growing horror that his plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of exposing Vince as just another brutish Deathworlder, he'd inadvertently made him the most popular student in class. And worse, his own role in orchestrating the theoretical murder discussion was probably obvious to anyone with half a brain. The chronometer on the wall eventually showed class was nearly over. In just a few minutes, he'd have to walk out of this classroom and face whatever consequences awaited him in the hallways. His prejudice had potentially earned him another Deathworlder enemy, possibly the most dangerous one yet. As the final minutes ticked away, Zaraxus found himself paralyzed with worry about what would happen when he stepped outside. When the chronometer finally signaled the end of class, Zaraxus reluctantly gathered his materials with trembling hands. His transparent organs were visibly quivering with each heartbeat as he contemplated the gauntlet he'd have to run through the hallways. Every instinct told him to wait until the corridors emptied, but that would only delay the inevitable. He stepped out of the classroom, his gelatinous body more tense than ever before. His fears proved prophetic when, at the very first turn, he stumbled directly into a group clustered around the lockers. Kazur, Mizara, the scaled Varir student, and, worst of all, Vince, all turned toward him at once, their sharp Deathworlder senses having detected his approach long before he'd seen them.
Well, well.
Kazur's multiple eyes focused on Zaraxus with predatory interest.
Look who decided to show up.
Mizara's ears perked forward, a cruel smile playing across her feline features.
The little academic who wanted to know how to kill humans. How thoughtful of him to join us.
The reptilian student hissed softly in what might have been amusement.
Maybe he wants to volunteer for a practical demonstration.
Zaraxus felt his organs seize with terror, but underneath the fear was something else, a grudging acceptance that he'd brought this upon himself. For once, he couldn't summon his usual righteous indignation. His orchestrated humiliation in class had backfired spectacularly, and now these Deathworlders were probably trying to prove themselves to their new human friend by introducing him to their favorite pastime of tormenting the weak nerd.
Come here, Zaraxus,
Kazur called, his voice carrying that familiar tone of mock friendliness that always preceded something unpleasant. When Zaraxus reluctantly approached, Kazur's powerful arms shot out and grabbed him by the shoulders, lifting his gelatinous form effortlessly against the cold metal wall. Zaraxus's feet dangled helplessly above the floor, his transparent body pressed uncomfortably against the surface as Kazur's grip tightened just enough to make his organs visibly shake with fear.
The familiar sensation of complete powerlessness washed over him, the same helpless feeling he'd experienced countless times before in these hallways. This was it, he thought. The moment Vince would join in, laugh along with the others, maybe suggest his own creative ways to torment the weak academic, and prove once and for all that all Deathworlders were exactly the same brutal creatures Zaraxis had always believed them to be. Instead, the human simply walked over to Kazur with his hands in his pockets.
I don't get it, Vince said conversationally. What's the fun in messing with him? It's pretty clear he's not built to handle this kind of thing.
Kazur's grip loosened slightly in surprise.
It's just some roughhousing. Builds character, you know, toughens them up.
Yeah,
Mizara added quickly.
it's good for him. It makes him stronger.
Vince nodded thoughtfully, that same casual expression on his face.
I agree with that. Roughhousing can definitely build character.
He paused, looking directly at Kazur.
We could try some of that outside if you want. It would be much more interesting doing it with me instead.
The change in atmosphere was immediate, thickening the air. Kazur slowly lowered Zaraxis back to the ground, his multiple eyes blinking rapidly as he processed the human's words. The scaled student took an involuntary step backward, and even Mizara's confident posture faltered. Something had shifted in the air around them, though Vince maintained that same relaxed, friendly demeanor he'd shown in class. There was no visible threat, no aggressive posturing, just a confidence that somehow made the hallway feel smaller and more dangerous.
You know what?
Kazur said after a long moment.
It's not worth it. Come on, let's go.
He turned to leave, gesturing for the others to follow. Mizara looked back reluctantly, her ears flattened against her head, but eventually followed Kazur down the corridor. The reptilian student was already halfway around the corner. Zaraxis stood against the wall, his organs still trembling as he tried to process what had just happened.
Why?
He finally managed to ask.
Why did you do that? Why did you save me?
Vince shrugged, that casual smile still on his face.
Because I could.
Zaraxis stared at him, his mind struggling to find the hidden motive.
This isn't some trick to beat me up alone without competition, is it?
Vince actually laughed at that, reaching out to gently pat Zaraxis' shoulder, a gesture that would have sent him into panic mode yesterday, but somehow felt harmless now.
You're overthinking this.
Several seconds of contemplation passed as Zaraxis watched the human's face, his mind racing to understand the motive behind the rescue. Why would a Deathworlder protect him? What could Vince possibly gain from interfering? There had to be some angle, some hidden purpose that his brain could decode if he just thought hard enough. But as he replayed the scene, he kept coming back to those simple words, "Because I could." Not because it served some greater plan, not because he wanted something in return, not even because he particularly liked Zaraxis, just because he had the power to help and chose to use it. The concept was so new to everything Zaraxis had learned about Deathworlder nature that it left him completely off balance. Finding no logical explanation that fit his preconceptions, he finally worked up the courage to speak.
I'm sorry,
he said quietly,
for refusing to share the room with you, for making you sleep in the library, for what happened in class today.
Vince's laugh was warm and genuine.
Don't worry about the room thing. Principal Sahaza found me an empty room to stay, and the class discussion was actually nice. Learned a lot about what other species think of us humans.
But tomorrow,
Zaraxis began, his organs already churning with anxiety about facing his classmates again.
Everything will be all right,
Vince said simply, adjusting his backpack.
Trust me.
As the human walked away down the corridor, Zaraxis remained against the wall for a long moment, watching him go. For the first time since arriving at the Galactic School, he found himself wondering if he'd been wrong about Deathworlders. About this one, he was fairly certain he had been.